You are listening to Nerd Best Friends, a podcast that covers the nerdy conversations you're already having, or wish you could. It's the nerdiest thing you'll do this week.
Welcome back to another episode of Nerd Best Friends. I am Annalise, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
Hey, it's me, Rob, your best friend, your super nerd, and your podcast host.
Nerd Best Friends can be found wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and follow us now. Support our podcast by clicking subscribe or follow on your devices, and find us on Patreon or Venmo for more support options. This is episode 49, and on today's episode, we are diving deep into the world of cult classics in pop culture. We'll be sharing our favorites and reminiscing about the moments that made these cult classics unforgettable. But first, what I like about it.
Hey, Annalise.
What's
All
up,
right,
Rob?
so for this episode, what I like about it, I chose miniature agnostic games.
Okay.
Miniature agnostic games are great for nerds like us who are continuing to collect and gain a giant collection of miniatures in all kinds of different genres, whether they be your high fantasy miniatures, your sci-fi miniatures, your miniatures that you have in these board games that you painted up, and really you only use them every once in a while because they were in this board game, but you got all these monsters and all this kind of stuff. Miniature agnostic games are games that they sell a rules system and that's it. They're not a miniature company. Or they're not trying to sell you pieces of plastic, right? For instance, biggest tabletop company in the world, Games Workshop. They make their bones selling miniature. Well, they make money selling miniatures and books because they come out with a new edition every 3 years for all their different games.
Of course.
But they really make it by selling the miniatures. They're a miniature company. They make amazing high quality models. Your board games, your luxury board games that have your miniatures in it, they're selling their rules and they're selling their boards, but they can sell their products at that higher luxury price because they're full of awesome looking miniatures and stuff like that, right? So there's always that kind of barrier. Or on a place like War Game Vault or DM's Guild or wherever, for like $10, you can pick up a PDF of somebody's game, their rule set that they came up with, whether it be all kinds of different genres. I mean, and everything is on the table when you start looking into this. It could be post-apocalyptic America. It could be alternate past World War II European. It could be high fantasy, low fantasy, science fiction in space, science fiction underground, like whatever ideas folks have, they can create a game around it and they make it miniature agnostic, meaning they're not trying to sell you miniatures. They don't have sculptors and designers and factories in China and all this kind of stuff. It's just use what you have. This game is about dudes with machine guns running around fighting slimy monsters. So go into your collection, find some dudes with machine guns and some slimy monsters. You're good to go. So everybody's experience will be a little bit different. Everybody's tabletop will be a little bit different. And that's fun. It's fun to use what you have. It's fun to get on things like the Facebook pages and groups and stuff for those games and share your pictures. This is how I did it. Well, this is what I'm using. You know, there's a community aspect there. It can be great for the new or younger hobbyist who has limited miniatures and stuff like that. It's also a great, on the other side of that, on the other end of that spectrum, it's great for folks like us or folks like me who have a million things. I don't know what to do with them, right? Because I just have models and models and models, but maybe they'd be perfect for this. Or maybe this is a good excuse to take out my X-Acto blades and start chopping heads off people and chopping arms off things and this one and that one and start swapping things over. So like, cool, I'm going to chop the head off of the machine gun guy and put put a rabbit head on him. Now he's an anthropomorphic soldier and whatever the genre might be. So it gives that opportunity for kit bashing and modeling. It gives opportunities for people who may be limited on what they're going to do. It opens up a little bit more of the imagination instead of the games that are very structured where it's like, these are our rules. If you want to play with this army, you have to buy this kit and paint it this way and stuff like that. So I think miniature agnostic games are absolutely wonderful. And there are millions of them out there. Whatever you're, whatever you're lacking or whatever you're thinking about, you can probably find it. Whatever miniatures are sitting in your collection, I'm like, when am I ever going to use this, whatever it might be? Oh, you know what I have? I have a set. It's a little squad of mice. They're like anthropomorphic mice wearing power armor with big machine guns and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
They're awesome. I need an excuse to paint
Sure.
these miniatures and play with them. I bet you I can find a miniature agnostic game that they'll be perfect for.
That's funny.
Mm-hmm.
But so miniature side away for a second.
Mm-hmm.
When you say there's millions of these games, does that also mean that they are available for people who aren't as gamey? Like it's not like a 6-hour table or a continuous, you've got to play week after week. There's a variety of like one shots or short games and longer games. I imagine that's the case for these.
100%. The idea being a lot of them will do that purposefully, knowing, oh, you know what's a barrier to entry for a lot of these tabletop games? 45-page rule books. So we're going to simplify it. We're going to make it fun. You're going to sit down with your friends. They know that this isn't going to be like the number one game in the world that everybody's heard of. So if we can make a game where you can sit down with your friend, you can build 2 small forces of the miniatures you already have. You can sit down with your friend, teach them the rules in 20 minutes, go play for an hour or 90 minutes and have a great time, then you're good to go. So when I'm thinking of things like 1-page rules or Cell Sorts and Spell Slingers, what's the other one? Space Weirdos. Oh, Rain in Hell. That's another one that's very like, there's just tons of stuff, right?
Yes.
There's a company called Osprey Press that has so many of these. They have like a web store and a library, and there's like hundreds of like little thin books you can buy with miniature agnostic game rules for like every genre. And then War Game Vault is an online store where a lot of independent creators just put their stuff up, and it could be, you know, full blown art and beautiful layouts and you pay $20, or it could be somebody like, hey, I put this rule together. I think it's cool. Pay what you want. $3 suggested or whatever, and get a ton of this stuff. And I've amassed a large collection, especially of PDFs for these games, just because I like looking through and be like, oh, how did they do their initiative system? Well, that's really different than anything else I've seen. Or what is the story here of Turnip 28? What's that about? You know, all these kinds of things. And so it's pretty fun.
The idea of it having digital versions and the PDF,
it makes the barrier to entry super low.
The fact that there are digital versions of this for people who maybe don't have space for all those minis and game room and bookshelves, to be able to have it digitally, I think is really cool.
That's what I like about that. Miniature agnostic games.
How about some nerd mail?
Nerd mail. I got some feedback from a listener who was talking about our Stephen King episode, and they were saying that constant reader, the idea of when Stephen King is addressing the audience or putting things in his books that's addressing that, it's that idea of constant reader, someone who's keeping up with the lore, reading all the books, you know, a fan kind of thing, but instead of calling a fan. And she was saying, you know this because that's the same thing with True Believers, which is how Stan Lee addressed the readers in his like Stan's soapbox and like all the editorials and when he would answer mail and stuff in the back of the comic book. So when you go to the back of your Spider-Man cover, it's like, hey, True Believers. And even when he would get a chance to be on TV and on interview shows and stuff, he would always address those Marvel fans, those people reading the comic books, as True Believer.
I didn't connect the two, but that's great. And they would have been right around the same time. I wonder who did it first.
Oh, that's a good. Well, I don't know.
Maybe
I mean, we're talking
Stanley,
60s, early 70s for Stanley.
It just depends on when he did it first. Right?
Pretty early, because when he was writing Stan's Soapbox, it was because he was in it, like still writing comic books, which I think was pretty early on.
So yeah, Stanley.
But yeah, thanks, listener Juliana. That was a great.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I also got some feedback on our Stephen King episode, and you know, we're talking about cult classics today. The Dark Tower, absolutely, in Bookland, is a cult classic. Stephen King has some really great stories about things that are integral to the storyline and fan mail that he would get. And I'm going to forget the exact reference, like rabbits or something, because of course I haven't finished the series, so I don't know all the ends of the Dark Tower, but someone sent him a, you know, kind of a, if you don't finish the Dark Tower, then the rabbit dies, like a fake drawing of a, you know,
okay.
I mean, it's just, he's received so much mail, and there's actually this like whole almost cult classic behavior behind a group of people where this may have been the only Stephen King they've ever written, but they're so passionate about this series of books that
because the genre is different kind of than the regular
than
stuff.
his
right?
normal like horror books, right? So the feedback I got was, you know nothing about Stephen King if you haven't read The Dark Tower. Like, people are passionate about it.
Come on,
So,
nerds. Let's go.
yeah, I love it. I loved it. It's the same kind of thing that when you read or hear Stephen King talk about it, he's talking about these people who are deeply, deeply involved with the Dark Tower series. So no, I still call myself a constant reader. I'm a big fan of Stephen King, but The Dark Tower is just not one. Like, it's hard. It's rough. I'm still on the second book. How long ago did I finish the first? Way beginning of this podcast season, I had finished the first. I'm struggling to finish book 2. So
Yeah, take that, you fake nerds.
yeah, it is what it is. Dark Tower lovers, Stephen King lovers, we have a Venn diagram, and the middle of the Venn diagram is much larger than we choose to say. Thank you, listeners, for writing in. Keep it coming. Let us know how much we tick you off in the middle of an episode.
So our listeners, we love listener feedback. We're always checking our social media for listener feedback and these comments and all those kinds of things. Also suggestions for episode ideas and things like that as we're looking ahead to finishing off this season and looking ahead to next season. If there are nerdy topics or projects or things that you're thinking about that you want to suggest for us doing, we would be happy to have that feedback. And I will tell you, nothing will make that dream a reality than if we get those comments and those suggestions on patreon.com. Those folks are the VIPs who are, really, like, they get our attention, right? We might see something on Instagram. It's like, oh, that's cool. That's a good idea. And then boom, right out of my brain. But the people on Patreon, now those people are invested, and those are the people we're trying to keep happy. So don't forget, patreon.com/nerdbestfriends. Sign up. There's multiple levels for multiple rewards. It's a growing community. We look forward to seeing you and your comments there.
100%. Here we go into cult classics. We're going to talk about them here. And in particular, we are talking about cult classic films. That being said, Rob, what is a cult classic?
A cult classic film is a film that is not your blockbuster film. It's not something that's super popular that everybody saw. In fact, it's usually the opposite. It's usually something that was, it could be a flop, or it could be just something that underperformed for one reason or another. It didn't make its money back, or it made a very small profit, and it wasn't exactly what the studio or the people creating it thought. Kind of a bummer. But after that initial release, it starts gaining this traction. Somehow fans find it and they keep it going. In the year 2024, this could be social media, people sharing things and those kinds of things. Back in the day when a lot of these movies we're going to talk about, it was word of mouth. It was sharing tapes. It was early lists of top 10 underrated movies you've never seen and those kinds of things. The BuzzFeed era might have these lists of movies that are good, but maybe you haven't seen. And so more and more and more people come up with them. The popularity of things like the VHS tape and rental places like The Warehouse and Captain Video and Blockbuster.
Captain Video, geez.
Right. Help this, because now we're bringing movies into the home. The DVD boom later on was still super popular. Like, get these movies and build your collection of your favorites, or again, rent them even on your streaming services and stuff. It's like, well, I never saw that in the theaters. I wasn't really interested, or I was busy, or this or that, but I'll give it a chance. Oh my gosh, this is really good. I got to tell my friends about this. Did you guys see this? That kind of thing. So it gains that popularity outside of its box office release. They're just what makes them the classics are they have this longevity, right? Fans get passionate about it. We know these movies because of the quotes, because of the costumes, because of the situations that we use as part of like the zeitgeist of culture in our everyday lives kind of thing. And I think as we go through some of our favorites, we will demonstrate that.
I agree with you on everything but the mainstream success. And I actually really struggled in researching this episode. I really struggled on finding a solid definition of a cult classic. In fact, just few places that I looked for just a distinct definition and not like an example list of them. Most of them said it morphs, and there's actually disagreement within the film community on whether or not that mainstream success is important. Because, and we'll notice with the movies that we both have on our lists, now they are mainstream. It's hard to tell whether or not that is. We can
get real into it, but like, I don't know that there is a mainstream anymore. I think
you have a good point on that.
Between the internet and Web 2.0 and social media, I think the monoculture is shattered. I think
you make a good point. Yeah.
except for a very few things that can kind of break that boundary. Like that's not the norm anymore, right? Like the Barbie Oppenheimer weekend is not something that happens all the time. Like that was notable.
Oh no, they say
special.
Yeah, they say Barbie saved the film industry or the movie going industry, like saved movie theaters for a reason. That whole weekend just reshifted what going to the movies meant, right?
Right. Nowadays, everything is a cult classic because we're not seeing it. Like everybody's in their own silos, right? If you're into anime, your Netflix, your Hulu is giving you more anime and you're living in that world. If you're into the real housewives of, or the real blank of blank, your algorithms are feeding you that and you're in that world and looking at all this stuff. There isn't this idea of like, oh, well, that was really niche or that's a cult classic because everybody went and saw this movie, but this was a little movie on the side. It's like rarely does that happen anymore.
I think it's a yes and no to that. And I think where you distinct that cult classic idea or the cult film idea is where it crosses over and it hits those other points that you made, right? I'm looking solely just at the box office, right? If we look just distinctly at money, we can determine a box office success on whether or not they at least made their money back. That algorithm and that idea of box office success is really based off of following the money, which is all movie studios want. Right. They just want to profit. They want to make their millions. They want to keep going. And, granted, there's that percentage that say they want to make the best films and blah, blah, blah. But I don't know that we see that in how we talk about movies anymore. That's what made that Barbie Oppenheimer weekend different, is because their numbers were out there and they were both skyrocketing success. But it was actually the fact that people are seeing the movie, talking about the movie. I didn't see it till it was available on the HBO Max, right? But I could tell you about references and lines and quotes, not because I watched it and I'm siloed in there. It was my algorithm, but because it hit those other categories you mentioned. Right?
Yeah, it was unavoidable in that way that it didn't matter where you were. You could still go have fun with your friends on this weekend and do the thing and whatever. And everybody had their meme of like dressing in their wildly like bright colored outfits and stuff. And like on my way to go see Oppenheimer, right? Like that was the joke kind of thing. So,
or a teacher showed up.
Anybody to do that. Yes.
Right. A teacher showed up with a mug that said, "I am Knuff." Like I get it. And I didn't need to see the movie to know that was, a contextual theme throughout. So what I got to was the cleanest definition that I can find. I'm going to read it to you. It says, a cult film is any film that has a cult following, although the term is not easily defined and can be applied to a wide variety of films. And I think the way you described a cult film is all of that wrapped up. For me, it just eliminates the box, whether or not it was successful in the box office. It's whether or not there's a cult following. Because we can call Star Wars a cult classic. It is a classic film because of its age. It has a cult following. But it did have what it considered at the time as box office success for a sci-fi movie. Now we can look at the billions it's made over time. But at the time, it broke even.
To me, the word cult means it's not in the mainstream. To me, the word cult means it's happening underneath your nose and nobody knows about it. One definition of cult could be dedicated, evangelistic, fanatical, right? Which is the Star Wars fan. But the other side of the word cult that I'm thinking of is it's kind of secret. You kind of don't tell your friends about it. Like you go to your nerd convention and you dress like Indigo Montoya, but like you're not talking about the Princess Bride at work, right? Like you are with Star Wars.
Well, you work at a very particular office that talks about Star Wars at work. That is not the reality for most people. I do not have, in my job, I do not have conversations about Star Wars with people because it's hard. Yes. Like some of the nerds have made themselves known and we talk about it when we see each other, but it's not prevalent in my office like the office of nerds you work for that are all tech people and all nerdy and all males about your age, almost all males about your age, that you're all you're in your own human algorithm.
All right.
Because I don't disagree with you on that secondary idea of cult, but then my brain says, well, if nobody knew about it, then it doesn't gain in popularity. So it gets in the mainstream.
That's why it's the cult following. It's kind of underground, like your cult.
But the cult following
it's out in the woods.
Just as easily be everybody. What you and I are talking about right now is exactly why there isn't an exact definition of it.
Sure.
Listeners will see. I think all three of we did a top 3 favorites, which we'll talk about briefly, and mine even briefer because I know at least 2 of the 3 I've mentioned before on the podcast. All of them are well-known films. All of them. Right now in this day of time in 2024, they're all well-known films because they became mainstream.
Yeah.
But let's go into it. Why don't you start, Rob? You just mentioned the reference to your number one.
Perfect. So mine is already a cheat based on my own definition. So
okay, good point.
this is The Princess Bride from 1987. Fantastic movie. One of my favorites. One of my top 3 favorite cult classic movies, The Princess Bride. It is a fantastic movie. The Princess Bride had a budget of $16 million and the box office take was about $31 million. So that is a successful movie. It almost doubled its budget, which is kind of that mark that, like you said, kind of old school or classic thinking about Hollywood would hit. It's like, you got to double your budget on profits.
It's a successful film.
So it's right there. We can't say that like nobody saw it or that it was a flop. It wasn't. But where it failed was that it was supposed to be, or it was the goal of that movie was for it to be a blockbuster. It was going to be this high fantasy comedy that everyone was going to see. And when we look back at it and watch that movie, we realize like how family friendly it was, but somehow the marketing didn't activate people. It either only activated the people who were wanting to see 1980s high fantasy movie, which was nobody, or it was activating just the people who were like really into comedy and they were like, oh, is that Billy Crystal? Oh, is that whoever kind of thing? Yeah. And maybe they would go to see this movie, but it wasn't this blockbuster. It wasn't this high fantasy epic, that finally broke through and everybody and their family came to see. It was just this mediocre Rob Reiner comedy.
And a comedy even is a stretch. The fact that they label it a comedy is problematic, but it's such a good film. I agree with you. This is easily one of the best films made at the time and for kids. It's so good and it stands the test of time. Like, and I imagine you showed it to Andrew.
Absolutely. Like at a young age too. Like we loved it. Yeah. And when you're a kid, it's great because it's adventurous and it's funny and the characters are very archetypical. Yes. And you keep going. And when you're a kid, like it gets up to that big climactic finish where he says the swear word and it's so good. Like there's never been a movie that has built more towards the one swear word it has in it.
Right. Yes.
that movie does. It's perfect for kids. So maybe, was it a comedy? Was it an action film? Was it a fantasy sci-fi film? Maybe because it's none of those, but it touches on all of them. Maybe that's why it didn't get super popular with the marketing and like their big blockbuster weekend. But this was, everybody had this VHS. Everybody had a copy of that in their big plastic box or whatever. And again, great for kids, great for family. Fun fact, Mark Knopfler of the Dire Straits composed the soundtrack for this movie.
Oh my gosh, that's something I've never heard before. That's
super weird, right?
Really odd. There's nothing Dire Straits in that movie, which makes sense because it's fantasy, but also
but also it's not
weird. But great. Hey, there are so many quotable lines from this movie. It is absurd.
Yes. That's where that longevity, like the cult classic is like, here we are almost 40 years later and you can be like in a conversation and be like, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. And people know,
Or I yell out inconceivable a lot in my
inconceivable. And then of course,
so many.
Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. That is classic. That is that cult classic.
There are high school kids wearing t-shirts with that on it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, so many great lines. And the great late Andre the Giant.
Oh yeah.
I remember marketing because like WWF was like a thing when we were that age.
And for those of you who are younger, this is not the World Wildlife Foundation. This is what they used to call professional wrestling. It was Worldwide Wrestling.
Yes. World Wrestling Federation,
That's
WWF, like the Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. That was a thing that they kind of anchored this. I remember seeing like Andre the Giant's in this new kids movie and everyone's like, oh, it's Andre the Giant. But yeah.
It had a great cast. When you look at like a lot of those folks went on to do like cool movies and shows and indie. Mandy Patinkin. What is the name of the Princess Buttercup character? She's like she's badass now in her older,
Rebecca Romaine Stamos. That isn't that who she is?
She was in House of Cards, which we don't talk about anymore. Robin Wright.
That's what I meant. Robin Wright.
Robin Wright from Forrest Gump and Unbreakable. That's a fun movie. I haven't thought about unbreakable in a long time.
You know, I was thinking Forrest Gump, but for some reason, the only name I could come up with was John Stamos's ex-wife. I don't know why, but yeah,
Right.
I was like, it's Jenny. It's Jenny. What is her name?
There you go. Yeah, that's right.
She's
right.
had a great career. Yeah.
It had Billy Crystal in it in a hilarious role. It has a lot of actors, if you haven't watched this movie because, you're not old like us, it's got a lot of actors, very young and just doing their thing in this very cool action comedy, family friendly romp that's just quotable till no end and a great, great time.
And I will say again, it stands the test of time.
There's nothing problematic.
Kids can watch it now.
Up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%.
My first is one I've talked about maybe 5 or 6 times on the podcast. I've mentioned it as one of my favorite films of all time. In the Nerd Watching in the 90s movies episode, the Stephen King episode, of course, I am talking about The Shawshank Redemption from 1994. If you haven't listened to any other episodes, this is based off of a novella by Stephen King called Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. The rights for it had been sold place to place in the 80s. No one could quite make do of it. 1987 rolls around and Frank Darabont gets the rights from Stephen King for something like $300. Here's a fun story about that I can't remember if I mentioned on the podcast. Stephen King held on to that $300 personal check from Frank Darabont, because no studio wanted to touch it, the story. There's only a little bit of difference between the novella and the movie, and that little bit of difference is how violent. It's much more jail violent, and that's probably why movie studios didn't want to touch it. But Darabont buys it for $300. Stephen King holds onto the check, and when it blows up, he sends the check back in a framed little photograph that says, in case he writes over the check, in case you need bail money, and sent it back to Frank Darabont. So he buys the rights in 1987. It takes him a bunch of time to get it greenlit and filmed, and it flops. It makes way less than the cost. It's got a handful of big name actors for the time in it as well. And then it goes out on VHS. And all of a sudden, people are watching it at home. And then all of a sudden, there's a couple of Academy Award nods, including Tim Robbins for playing Andy for Best Actor. And there's a couple others. And then all of a sudden, once the Academy Award nominations come, it's re-released. And now it's made millions upon millions upon millions after that re-release a year later. But initially, not a popular film, but so good that people were watching it at home and telling their friends, oh, here, go rent it from Blockbuster this weekend. It's really good. And then Academy Awards. And then
I wonder if along with that kind of idea of it being cheap because nobody went and saw it and they wanted to get it out, and this VHS is how quickly it was available for licensing and running on television. Because when I saw 1994, 1995, that seemed late to me because I felt like I watched that movie a ton of times in high school because it was on TV. It was on like TNT. It was on the Channel 5 afternoon movie. It was on, whatever these channels were. Like, I remember it being on. Like, I've seen this movie in pieces a dozen times, and I know I wasn't popping in a VHS tape. I know it was it was on TV and I was catching it. And I would have said like, oh yeah, that was high school. So that would have been like 93 through 97 kind of thing. But you're saying it was still in theaters re-released in 95.
Yes.
So they must have really fast tracked that out to television distribution as well, right?
I imagine, again, with movie studios, you follow the money. I imagine once it started getting more popular, the Academy Award nominations come out, they re-release. And see, some of this is backwards too, because there's some rule, like you can't release it to VHS during Academy Award nominations. So the nominations must have come first, then it goes out on VHS, and then it got re-released. So
I might just have my timeline wrong. And what I'm thinking was all through high school was really like senior year and first couple years of college. But
yeah, it might have been college. It might have been like your first year of college right out of high school, because it did go to TNT relatively quickly, and it's still there. It's still shown all over the place. And I will say, you made me think, if you or any listener has not actually watched this unedited for television front to back, I highly recommend it. It's one of those films where the pacing is just brilliant. It's a pacing thing, right? Forrest Gump is a pacing thing. Any more or less in each of those eras, we would lose interest in the film and the pacing, and it's just beautiful. It's like a melody that ebbs and flows, and like Frank Darabont nailed it. And I think of Good Will Hunting, same thing, right?
Yeah.
A little too much of them being fast and delinquents would have been too much of him being super smart guy. Like it just ebbs and flows in this really passionate way that it's gorgeous if you've never done it front to back.
I don't think I have, but I love a well-paced movie, and I fall on the side of a movie that takes its time and lets the scenes breathe a little bit and lets the actors go.
It's one of those that in directing, I learned that they play Red's voiceovers as they're moving the camera, so the actors are aware what the audience is hearing at the time. And that's not common when you do voiceovers. Usually they film it and then the voiceover matches the screen, right? In this case, they had him do all those voiceovers and they were playing them over loudspeakers as they were doing these big washing frames over this real prison in Ohio. Like it's
very cool. What a great help for the actors to understand like the gravity of that scene and like how just hearing like the music in the background, hearing that voiceover, I imagine is a great directing tool to let those actors know like, oh, this is a serious face, or this is a look out into the distance moment, or this is a walk slowly with my head up, not a shuffle with my head down.
It's really great. And also handfuls of repeatable lines in that as well. I think that's true for all the movies.
I wish I could say that was the last time I saw Andy Dufresne. Like I say that all the time. Just put Andy Dufresne as anything else. Like anything that happens, it's like, I wish I could say that was the last time I had to bail out this employee with an email. I'd like to say that, but I can't.
Get busy living or get busy dying.
The only man I ever met could crawl through a mile of and walk out clean the other side.
Oh, I gotta love it. Also popular because of Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman nails it in that movie. That's where the quotable lines come from me. It's the Morgan Freeman
his
lines.
Yes. So what do you got for your second favorite cult classic?
Number 2 on the list is 1999's Office Space.
Okay.
Office Space is a movie that had a $10 million budget and brought in $12 million at the box office. Now that is
expectations.
That is a failure, my friend.
What are you talking about? They made money.
I mean, not Hollywood money. That's not making money.
They did better than breaking even.
You're supposed to make your money back double, I believe, is the definition of a Hollywood success. But yes, it made a little bit of money. I guess it was worth doing, but it became worth doing more in the long run as people fell in love with this movie. All of the relatable things about working in an office space with weird coworkers and this like random idea being put together with people in this workspace that you spend a ton of time with that you may not have anything in common with except for the hardship of working for a miserable company. This was ahead of its time, right? If we think about the workplace comedy, the workplace satire, The Office, Parks and Rec, the IT Crowd. These are things that are very popular now, but 20 years ago when this movie came out, it was a new idea. Like, well, what's so funny about going to work? What's so cool about this movie of people who work in an office? And it's like the satire, the look at what corporate America is like and just flipping it on its head and saying like, no, this is ridiculous. The things that are happening to all of us every day, I think is where that has its long tail. And what's incredible about that is the things that are ridiculous and laughable and super, super annoying about working in corporate America then are exactly the same now. We can still relate. The technology has changed a little bit. The money amounts have changed a little bit with inflation, but like to the core of it, this movie still slaps.
Anti-establishment, which was a theme. It's a theme that's a theme that's been around forever, but in a manner, you're right, that we hadn't seen really in movies or television.
It's funny to think that this movie and The Matrix came out the same year.
At the same time, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this was
because they have the same message.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Anti-establishment in a completely different way.
I've seen this before for next season. The Matrix and Office Space. We're comparing them.
We already did. The Matrix. What? Wow.
Just kidding.
All right. So this one's written by Mike Judge, who's famously known for Beavis and Butthead. And so that has that edge. Well, not yet at this point, right?
Oh, no. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So this was after the success of the Beavis and Butthead movie. And he writes this based off of a comic strip, I believe. A comic strip or a comic book. It's based on his own cartoon series called
That makes
Milton.
sense. I mean, Beavis and Butthead has one of the first and only cartoon he ever came out with, right? I mean, he has
a series apparently called Milton that wasn't necessarily popular, but he had a series and based this movie Office Space on that. And so we all know Mike Judge, which also I think lends to it being a little ahead of its time, because realistically, Beavis and Butthead was ahead of its time. It was comedy that was cutting edge for us at the time.
It was, because it was that idea of like, we were looking at ourselves, right? It took the idea of like, oh, these kids today, all they do is sit around like a bunch of morons watching MTV. And it's like, yeah, here's what that looks like.
And it was speaking our language at the time, for the most part. I mean, we didn't talk about bungholes as much as they do, but
we might have.
We could have. We probably did more after watching Beavis and Butthead, but
exactly right.
This is a really great movie.
This movie is another one that is still, I think still holds up today. I think the truths or the power that it's speaking to and about are the same as they are today. And again, just like Princess Bride, just like Shawshank Redemption, it's that super quotable movie. Right?
Yeah.
Looks like somebody's got a case of the Mondays. That's from this movie.
And the whole thing about the stapler.
Oh my gosh, the stapler guy
that
is
still
just
exists. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. And you think, and like, you'll meet people in your work life. You'll meet people, you'll be like, dude, that's like the stapler guy from Office Space. He's going to burn this place down one day.
And he's the dodgeball guy too, right? He's the,
yes.
I watched the dodgeball tournament on ESPN 8, the Ocho.
That guy is great. And then just having that boss, the Bill Lumbergh.
Yes.
What a perfect portrayal. Yeah. If you could just go ahead and, come in this weekend, that'd be great. Walks away with his cup of coffee.
I went totally different with my second pick and went with Pee-wee's Big Adventure from 1985.
That was really good. That's a great choice.
And I didn't know this until I did research for this episode. This was Tim Burton's directorial debut.
Really?
I did not know that. So this was, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I ever knew that Tim Burton directed this. And now that I think about it,
but as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
That tone makes total sense for this movie. So this movie comes out after the popularity of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, or Big Top Pee-wee. No, that's the movie.
No, that's the sequel. It was Pee-wee's Playhouse, but it was the HBO version before like the Saturday morning version that we saw.
Right. Well, and this is following the popularity of the Saturday morning show. After it went on HBO, it was a little bit more adult themed. Then it was a Saturday morning kids show, and it was popular enough that they make this movie.
Oh, okay.
That's my understanding. And then the movie did not do as well as they expected it to, but I
believe it. I mean, that dude's weird. It's got a whole weird Tim Burton vibe. Like, yeah, I could see it not being mainstream.
But it's quotable. People dress like Pee Wee Herman. After the death of Paul Reubens, what was it, just last year, a lot of people came forward with how absolutely impactful this character Pee Wee was for being oddball and not mainstream and awkward and funny humor and just so much that made him different that kids and teens at the times were like, oh, I'm different too. And it's totally okay. The impact of this movie is way bigger than they could have ever known in 1985 when it was considered a flop movie, but they still made the second movie.
Oh yeah.
And it's still like I don't know if that they stand the test of time, but the character does. And the impact of this character, who's just a kind person, does.
I mean, it will, I bet you it will make you laugh out loud. In fact, I will challenge Andrew and his buddies when they're doing a movie night to watch this movie and see if they don't just like crack up at some of the ridiculous things in this movie. The scene where he's dancing to the tequila song. What
Classic.
Is that?
Classic. Why? I don't know. But you know what? Neither do those motorcyclists. And they ended up loving Pee-wee instead of killing him. I always think of one of the long lost scenes is when he's making breakfast in the morning. You remember this scene?
Yes.
Like he makes his breakfast and it's a smiley egg pancake and he has it talking to him and then he pours a load of cereal over that and then his alarm goes off and he gets up and leaves. Like there's just so much to it. All these little bits and pieces. It itself doesn't stand the test of time because of technology, right? Like him searching for his bike and the manner he does it would obviously have different mechanisms in a today atmosphere.
That, yeah.
But the idea of him finding his beloved bike that's been stolen and how special it is to him, it's still like a kid could relate to it today. And you are right. I would not take that bet with you because 100% there would be laughter.
All right, favorite quotes from the Pee Wee Herman movie.
I mean, you have I know you are, but what am I? You have all of his taglines, right? For me,
one of my favorites is Tell them Large Marge sent ya.
I do actually say that all the time.
Yep.
Like when me and Sarah are going we're exploring a new restaurant here. Like, you're gonna go put our name in? Tell them Large Marge.
Tell them Large Marge sent ya.
There's also, there's no basement in the Alamo.
Brilliant.
Right. It's the only thing I know about the Alamo. And anytime I see friends on like Facebook or Instagram that are like, hey, look, we're visiting the Alamo. That's my comment. There's no basement at the Alamo.
Don't forget to check the basement.
There's a lot. And for me, it's scenes. Like I remember that breakfast scene. I remember when he finds his bike at a movie. Obviously they're saving money on sets here, but he found it in a movie studio for some
like
reason.
A studio lot, yeah.
Yeah, and so he goes and he grabs it, and they think he's stealing the bike because they don't realize it's his, and he's riding his bike through all the different scenes and stuff. Like, I mean, come on.
What a perfect trip through the 80s that scene is, right?
And seeing those movies, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is still also the one where he cross-dresses, right? He dresses like a woman, and he's in the car with the guy, and there's like a checkpoint, and I could be confusing it with Big Top Pee-wee, but...
I don't remember that scene.
There's a scene where he has to pretend to be a woman because the police are looking for him. And that might be the second movie, but Pee-wee's Big Adventure, not box office. It goes opposite of my whole point of view that it doesn't have to be box office, but all the other things. And Tim Burton, can't go wrong.
Tim Burton as heck.
All right. So we got one more, Rob.
All right. The top movie, the top cult classic for Rob. Now, this is kind of funny because I was talking with guest of the show, Juliana, the other day, and
yes,
we were saying like, oh God, Nerd Best Friends. The next one we're doing is cult classic movies. And she looked at me just right away, like no hesitation. She's like, you just need another excuse to talk about the Iron Giant again. I'm like, yes, another excuse to talk about the Iron Giant again.
Constant listener. Thank you.
Oh, 100%. Mark this on your bingo card, everybody, or when you're playing your drinking game. It came up again. The Iron Giant from 1999 had a budget of $50 million, and it pulled in $31 million at the box office. Absolutely absolutely sad trombone on that one. This movie was different. This is a movie that early on was injecting computer generated animation into it. The style of the art it looked different than Disney. And this is when Disney was resurging in popularity on the coattails of The Lion King or whatever else may have came out in the 90s there. And it looked different, and it wasn't Disney. And I think it didn't grab people, or it just didn't look quite right to the mainstream for whatever reason. And nobody went and saw this movie. So where that cult classicness comes in is through its long tail, right? Like nobody went and saw it when it came out, but over and over and over again, word of mouth and stuff just kind of built this out to be, no, like this is a really good movie. I think it's got two heavy themes that speak to people, especially kind of nerd people that would, later on go back and watch an animated movie about a giant robot who talks about Superman all the time. Basically people like me. It's got a big anti-war message, and it's got the you are who you choose to be message. Excuse me. I think that speaks to people. I think it continues to be true. I think the fact that the movie is not set in a time, it is set in a time period. It's a period piece of kind of the Red Scare, makes it so it's not like, oh, well, like you were talking about with Pee-wee's Big Adventures. Like that might not hold up for some viewers because, well, don't they have cell phones? Well, don't they have Wikipedia? Exactly. Like, don't they have this kind of thing? Because it's set in, beatnik late 50s Red Scare time, like you don't get any of that. And I think 1999, I think that was right around the time when DVDs were switching over, and there was a boom there of like, oh, well, you have to build your DVD collection, or look how much better movies look now that we have DVDs instead of VHS. And that might have helped with some of that computer generated animation. It's like, oh, but look how good it looks on your new home television set with your DVD player kind of thing.
Right.
Might have helped that popularity go.
Absolutely. And it's such a great, well-written story.
Oh, I think so.
Even not being a period piece, it stands the test of time, right? It could be plopped into any time period. It's so well written.
And I love that just nerds keep talking about it, right? Like I keep talking about it. I love it. Probably one of the more famous places that you'll see it is in Ready Player One. Mm-hmm. It was in the book and it was in the movie.
Great nod.
And I think if anybody was like, oh, like what's that giant robot? There's that opportunity for somebody like me to be like, oh, that's the Iron Giant. Want to come over? We're going to watch it. I have it on an HD DVD.
I will make you tacos if you come watch it.
Is that how I got you to come watch it?
No, I haven't. Oh. I've not seen it. I still haven't seen it.
Shut up.
You know that. No, I talk about that. I say that every time you bring up the Iron Giant.
I thought we watched it at my house. What the?
No, I've seen. So it's just like you say with Shawshank. I've seen bits and pieces of it throughout time. I have not seen the whole movie front to back.
Oh my gosh. And here I was planning, I thought next year we were starting the Lord of the Rings, chapter of our podcast, but apparently no, there's important business we have to get to.
Oh, well, to be
You didn't watch that at my house?
No. Now, what you may be thinking at the time when I first moved back and we met, like, I think it was Wednesdays. I think before we thought it was Fridays. Every Wednesday I was coming over, we were having dinner, watching a movie, and we had to start it super early so that we weren't up late. So Wednesdays before we were playing that D&D campaign, I was coming over and watching all of MCU in timeline order, not release date order. And we made plans to do other things once we finished the MCU. One of them was Harry Potter. One of them was Star Wars. I think one of them was this. And then I was like, oh, I'll show you like Romy and Michelle's or something as well. Like we just keep trading movies. So we made plans for it. And then March 2020 came, everything shut down and we never went back to that list. So we did Star Wars separately. You like sent me the list. And since we were on lockdown, I just watched a bunch of Star Wars and Rebels and all that stuff before the last 3 films came out, or the last 2, or the last one. I can't remember. 8 or 9 before it came out, we had a whole Star Wars list. I think Iron Giant was on that list, and I think that's why you think that I came over and watched it.
All right. Well, shame on you for not seeing it. Spoiler alert. At the end of this movie, of course, the Iron Giant makes the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes.
And he goes flying off into space to meet the nuclear missile that's going to destroy the town. Yes. And after the whole movie, he says the only line like that the Iron Giant really says, a full sentence, and looks at the kid and says, I am Superman, and then takes off into the sky, and it's amazing.
Yes, I've seen, like I said, I've seen the whole movie. You did not spoil alert. That is the hardest place to watch the film.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, so mark your bingo card, take your drink. Iron Giant came up on the podcast again.
I mean, this is actually we should market this episode with the bingo card. Annalise mentioned Stephen King and Shawshank Redemption, and Rob mentioned Iron Giant, and you mentioned sci-fi and minis and tabletop gaming, and this would be a great Nerd Best Friends bingo. Or drinking game if you are of age. Yeah, my number third. Woohoo! My third choice is probably one that many of our listeners have never heard unless they're amazing and awesome like me. I am choosing, also from 1999, ironically, Drop Dead Gorgeous. And I know I've mentioned this one on the podcast before. It is not a very popular movie at all, which is surprising because there's a lot of big name actors in it. Kirstie Alley, and I'm going to blank on some of the other adult names because what I wrote down was young actresses who were in this movie around the time or just before they were really famous, like Kirsten Dunst, Brittany Murphy, Denise Richards. Lots of actors in this film. It is...
Amy Adams is in this film.
Amy Adams is in this film, yes. And this is way before Amy Adams was known for anything. This is dark comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It is about a pageant in small town America where they're trying to nominate the winner of this beauty pageant in their small town to go compete in regionals and nationals. Murder and things happened, and I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who wants to see it, but it is that dark humor, oddball in the same manner that is The State. And I say that because it was directed by Michael Patrick Jan, who is a former cast member and writer of The State. Now, this was not written by someone of The State, but it's that same tone. It's filmed as if it's a documentary, so it's a mockumentary format.
Gotcha.
A little bit like This Is Spinal Tap, but it's just got a darker edge and darker humor to it. And I mean, there are so many quotable lines from this, but I rarely quote them for people because it's very rare to find someone who's seen this film. So Drop Dead Gorgeous, if you are a dark humor fan, this is a great one to watch. If you are a fan of The State, this is just like Reno 911 and Brooklyn Nine-Nine and all the things that these people went on to do. This is in that category with those as well. It is that tone and tempo and humor of the state.
For me, this movie is about the scene where they're in the beauty pageant and everyone has like a ridiculous diorama strapped to the top of their heads.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That is that's that Pee Wee Herman
Monuments of America.
Yes. Monuments of America. And somebody has the Eiffel Tower on their head. Like, yes. It's incredible.
There's another really famous scene where they have white shorts because the theme is like red, white, and blue or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so they have these like blue and red tops and white shorts, and they're practicing a dance that uses little like 2-foot ladders that have been painted blue, but the paint hadn't dried yet. So all of a sudden, all over themselves as they're going through this dance routine is just getting dyed blue everywhere. And the judges are just sitting there cracking up. And it's so good. There's so many actors in this one, and I highly recommend it. To me, it also has that dark humor tone like The House of Yes, which I didn't put on any of my lists. I don't know if it's enough to consider it. That's a really, really deep dive in terms of a cult movie. But The House of Yes has that dark humor. So if any listeners know The House of Yes or The State, and you have not seen Drop Dead Gorgeous, have at it. It's really worth it.
Of course, there are many more. I'm looking at this document and I've got another 5 on my list. You've got another more on your list.
Like 8 or 9, yes.
So this is one of those things where we can't sit here we could sit here and talk 4 hours about cult classics, but that is not how the modern podcast listener wants to deal with their commute. If you want some other ideas about where our other cult classics are, again, you're going to want to subscribe to the Patreon at that $3 level. This is where you get the newsletter. I would love to hear about your favorite cult classic, and we will definitely read that in the Nerd Mail section if you can get that into us. It's that time again. What's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
I think I hinted at it last episode because we were in the middle of NFL playoffs, but I'm going to say the nerdiest thing I did this week was flat out instinct guess my brackets for fantasy football contest, including you and some of our friends, and winning so hard that I won before the Super Bowl even aired.
You know what? First of all, screw you. Second of all, this is not the nerdiest thing you did this week because you didn't do anything nerdy. You just poked your favorite team 3 times in a row so that you could get in the thing. I made a spreadsheet. I did research. I had conversations out loud in my car with ChatGPT about trying to pick my teams and trying to get I was looking up historical records of people who won road games and the weather patterns and who was in a dome and who wasn't. I nerded out on the thing. You just said, I like the 49ers. Poke, poke, poke. Give me your $100, please.
I mean, that would only account for half my bracket. I was still right on so many more things. Okay, so the nerdiest thing I did this week is actually nerdy. I say that I like random picked. We each got 2 brackets, right?
Right.
The one that's like last place was when I did all the work to go, oh yeah, I think this team is favored over this team. Like I did that work. And the bracket that won, I did the opposite of all that except for the 49ers.
Well,
so that's how I play that. But truthfully, what's happened to me a lot lately, at least lately, like in my life, not just this year, I like football so much. I used to be like, I just want to watch the 49ers. That's it. But like, I have it on when I'm working on the podcast on Sundays or doing work in the nerd room or I'm playing a game in a nerd room. I have games on, so I'm listening to a lot. Mm-hmm. And also because of that, my algorithm on social medias is showing me a lot of like people who are talking about football because, advent of all this media stuff, people can talk about it a lot. So I'm listening a lot. And the bracket that won, even though I'm saying like I did opposite of all those things, I went with momentum.
Okay.
Honestly, I thought about momentum. Like the Eagles had lost 8 of their last 9 games or something like that.
Right.
It's something, I mean, that's an exaggeration, but they had lost a ton at the end. It didn't matter how good everyone thought they were. They were not in a good place when the playoffs started. I'm not surprised that they lost. And I chose that they lost. Same thing with the Cowboys. Everyone was high on the Cowboys coming into the playoffs because they were winning. But if you look at all the teams that they played on that win streak, I think only one team, which was the Eagles, they were over 500. They had won at least half their games. Everyone else was under. So it wasn't impressive that they were going on this steamrolling against teams, because once they hit a hard team, they hadn't been challenged in the last half of the season. So to me, it was just momentum. And I think that's why all of those surprises for a lot of people led me to have such a big lead that there was no comeback. But I will also say I was helped by the collapse of the MVP Lamar collapsing in the playoffs again, because it could have come down to the Super Bowl, and whoever won the Super Bowl was going to win our.
That's how I was thinking it was going to go. But no, old Lamar decided to be a choke artist and let us all down. But that's football. Yeah, there was an interesting thing, because I also did fantasy football during the season. Right. And when you do that, or when I did that, I wasn't paying attention to the teams. I couldn't tell you who won the games. I just know what player beat me or what player did for me. So it's when it came to, say, the Eagles, I was like, well, Jalen Hurts is getting 30 points a game and winning it for me, so they must be good. It's no, they're terrible. Terrible. That dude just, rushes a lot and scored a couple touchdowns for you.
Yep. And that's also why I don't play fantasy football, is because I like the stories behind the games. Right. I like the drama behind the games. And you don't get that, I think, when you're watching whether or not a player does well. Because, I can take Caleb Williams in USC this year. If you look at his stats and he was a fantasy NFL player, he would be winning you tons of points every week. But USC had such a horrible schedule this year. Offense is scoring 30 to 40 points a game and losing by 10.
But still losing. Yeah.
So I went with momentum. And for me, I was super surprised. Even when I signed up reluctantly, going, well, you're just going to take my money because I'm just going to pick the Niners. I'm a homer. But yeah, I'll play. So it was a shock to me. I don't bring it up to brag. I bring it up because honestly, I was shocked. Just that first weekend came about and it wasn't even close, those first 2 weekends. And I was like, how is this even a thing, when I chose based off momentum and random thoughts?
I mean, that's why you get 2 brackets.
I guess. But that was me. What about you?
So I did a couple nerdy things this week as I was going through. With the new year had come and I hadn't really taken time to do what I do sometimes, which is overschedule and overplan my life. So I did that. So if you remember from last season or maybe even earlier episodes, I would always talk about how I build hobby time and stuff into my week, right? Every other Monday is this D&D game, and every other Monday is something with the family, and every Tuesday is this, and every Friday is we watch movies and shows, that kind of thing. But that has changed over time. It's just kind of changed, and found ourselves maybe wasting some evenings, not wasting, but not having a plan. Oh, we're all home. We could have done something today, but now it's over and we didn't play a game. And part of the 2024 revamp is to play more games with people and stuff, instead of just hobby, but actually use the stuff that I built and paint and all that kind of stuff. So I decided to look at that and revamp it. And sure enough, I've got my 2-week nerd schedule all laid out and color coded. And here, look, I'll even share it with Annalise.
Ooh, I get the visual.
You get the visual. So you got to have your 2-week plan so that every other, Rhyme of the Frostmaiden, that's a Rhyme of the Frostmaiden week. But other Wednesdays we're doing family night. We got masks on Saturday. Maria and I have hobby time together now this year that we're trying to formalize and stuff like that. So that was fun, and to go through the calendar and try to work out how we could do stuff like that. And just, it's part of the nerd goals. It's part of sticking to the schedule. It's part of all that good stuff. So I'm happy about that. And the other thing, part of that time I was just mentioning that we're trying to build in with Maria and I to hobby and paint and stuff back in the nerd room together is we're working on a collab now.
Ooh.
So if you remember from, 2 years ago, the Dungeons and Lasers Kickstarter, where I got just boxes and boxes and boxes of all that stuff, where they just over promised and delivered on all their stretch goals and stuff. We busted open a big box of terrain. It's swamp terrain with all these rotten docks and gnarled trees and bushes and dead fish and treasure piles and stuff. And so we're going to do a collab on that. We're going to share that one back and forth. So it'll have both of our different styles on it and that kind of thing, which we've never done before. So got some family time painting and projects and trying to organize time so that we're efficient and spending as much time together as a family while we still have this teenager in the house. I want to make sure that we're doing it right.
Yeah, that sounds great. What a great idea to use all of that Kickstarter minis to work on it together. I think that's really awesome.
Well, we had done that before. The minis that made up the townspeople of Morsane for the game we played in Vegas.
Yeah.
That was a Dungeons and Lasers box, and Maria painted about half of those as we were just like cranking them out like crazy.
Wow. How fun.
Next episode, we bring back What Are You Doing? Join us as we reveal the nerdiest things we've been up to. From the pages of the latest comic book we're reading to the miniature worlds we're bringing to life. We'll share the triumphs and challenges of our latest D&D campaigns, television mounting, and all kinds of things that have us. I broke Annalise on that one. But we want to hear from you. In between this episode and next episode, please do write in with the nerdiest things you're doing. What have you been up to since the new year? Or how did you finish out 2023? What is the nerdy projects that you're working on? So we're going to share what we're doing. What are you doing? If you want to keep up to date on Nerd Best Friends, hit that subscribe or follow button on your device. We appreciate our fans, especially the ones that share our podcast with others and give us that 5-star rating wherever they get their podcasts. We are at Nerd Best Friends on social medias, and you can send us a message through podcast@nerdbestfriends.com. These are the best and easiest ways to grow our nerd family.
Yeah, thanks for throwing me under the bus there, Rob. I got to go try to finish mounting this TV. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening.
All right, until next time. Are you asking me, or is that what you want me to say?
Which would you rather? You want to go first? You want to go second?
I can go first.
I swear, I talk with my hands. It's just going to be a thing, but it derails us every time. This dumb Mac thing that keeps popping up, thumbs up and fireworks and balloons while I'm talking.
I love it.